Today, we are undertaking a thorough examination of one of the most explosive and culturally revealing criminal conspiracies in the history of American higher education.
We're talking about the scandal known by its federal code name, Operation Varsity Blues.
Right. This case, which really came to light in 2019, was just monumental. It completely ripped away the veneer of meritocracy.
It really did. It exposed the extraordinary and, criminal lengths that some wealthy parents were willing to go to guarantee undergraduate admission for their children.
And not just to any schools. We're talking about some of the nation's most prestigious universities.
Exact.
We're going to be looking at some extensive source material today, really getting into the details of the core mechanisms of this fraud, the crucial players, and the lasting systemic implications this whole saga has had.
And it's all about the intense pressure surrounding elite college admissions in the United States. To really grasp the gravity of this, you have to understand the scale immediately.
This wasn't just a one-off thing.
No, not at all. This was a sophisticated, decade-long criminal enterprise. We're talking over $25 million.
$25 million.
Channeled illegally by 33 parents just between 2011 and 2018. And when the charges were finally announced, at least 53 individuals were implicated.
Which makes this the largest case of its kind ever prosecuted by the U.S. Department of Justice.
By far.
That $25 million figure, it isn't just a large number. It represents a comprehensive system of corruption. And to understand how that infrastructure was built and maintained for 7 years, we have to start with the man at the very center of it all.
William Rixinger.
Exactly. William Rixinger.
He was a 58-year-old from Newport Beach, California. And he wasn't just a college counselor, he was really an entrepreneur of fraud.
That's a good way to put it.
He essentially monetized the anxiety of the elite. He was selling a guarantee for admission to these highly selective institutions, schools that, reject upwards of 90% of their applicants legally.
His reach was just incredible. Our sources say Singer boasted that he had unethically facilitated college admission for children in more than 750 families during his career.
And we should be clear, not all of those involve criminal acts, but the number is still staggering.
It is. But what made his system so effective and so difficult to trace at first was the specific financial architecture he designed to launder all that bribe money.
That's the key. He operated through two main entities. There was the Edge College and Career Network, which was his legitimate for-profit consulting LLC.
Correct.
But the key Worldwide Foundation, that was the criminal engine. And this foundation held the critical status of a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
Okay, let's unpack the insidiousness of that 501c3 structure, because that's where the tax fraud element really comes into play. Why did that specific setup work so well for him?
It was brilliant in its criminality. You see, parents didn't write a check to Rixinger personally. That would look suspicious. Instead, they'd write a massive check, often in hundreds of thousands of dollars, to the key Worldwide Foundation, and they'd frame it as a donation.
A donation meant to help underprivileged youth, supposedly.
Exactly. And from there, this payment traveled down two different criminal paths at the same time.
Path one being the money laundering to conceal the bribe itself.
Precisely. The funds were immediately masked as legitimate charitable contributions on the foundation's books. Then there's path two, the tax evasion component.
Because the key Worldwide Foundation was a registered nonprofit.
Yes. So the parents could then claim those massive payments, say $100,000 or even $500,000, as legitimate charitable deductions on their personal tax returns.
Oh, they were compounding the crime. They were essentially forcing American taxpayers to subsidize their illegal bribes.
That's exactly what was happening. It just adds this layer of contempt to the entire conspiracy. Not only were they circumventing the merit system, they were committing fraud against the IRS to make the cry cheaper for themselves.
A scheme this sophisticated, running this long, it must have required some tight security. So how did the authorities finally find out about it?
The irony is it was a complete accident.
Really?
Yeah. Federal authorities just stumbled upon the fraud in April of 2018. They were investigating a totally unrelated case.
What was the case?
They were looking into a Los Angeles businessman named Maury Tobin for an alleged pump-and-dump conspiracy and securities fraud.
So Tobin is facing serious charges himself, and he decides to try and buy some leniency by offering up a truly explosive lead.
Yes. Tobin, who was actually a Yale alumnus, told investigators that Rudolph "Rudy" Meredith, the head coach of Yale's women's soccer team, had asked him for a $450,000 payment.
Wow. And the goal of that payment?
To help Tobin's youngest daughter secure admission to Yale as a phony soccer recruit.
$450,000 just to get his daughter in. That level of demand is what finally gave investigators the traction they needed to get inside this secretive world.
It was the thread they could pull. The FBI moved swiftly after that tip. Tobin agreed to cooperate.
So he wore a wire.
He did. On April 12, 2018, he met Coach Meredith in a Boston hotel wearing a recording device. Once Meredith confirmed all the details on tape, he was confronted by the authorities.
And that chain of cooperation then led directly from Meredith to the core organizer.
Directly to William Rick Singer.
So Singer's whole scheme was undone by a sequence of increasingly desperate informants, starting with a securities fraud defendant just trying to save his own skin.
That's right. And once confronted, Singer recognized the gravity of the situation. He pleaded guilty almost immediately in March 2019.
Singer's quick cooperation was absolutely central to the prosecution's ability to build airtight cases against all the parents and the coaches, right?
Oh, completely. He turned over hundreds of hours of recorded conversations. Many of them were recorded at the direction of the FBI, and they detailed the agreements, the payments, everything.
And despite this cooperation, the sources note that Singer faced multiple, incredibly serious felony charges.
Yes. Conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and the heavy charge of racketeering conspiracy.
Can you explain what racketeering means in this context?
Yeah.
Because it sounds very serious.
It is. Racketeering conspiracy, under the IRPA Act, essentially means you're organizing and participating in a pattern of crimes, a criminal enterprise. This wasn't just a single bribe.
It was a system.
It was a systematic racketeering enterprise that spanned years, crossed state lines, and used that foundation to commit fraud, money laundering, and bribery over and over again. It really reflected the institutionalized nature of his crime.
And crucially, his cooperation didn't shield him completely. I read that he even faced an obstruction of justice charge. Why was that?
Even after he agreed to cooperate with the FBI, he actually tried to warn some of his clients that they were under investigation.
No.
Yes, a highly illegal move that led to that additional charge. It sort of demonstrated that even while he was trying to mitigate his own sentence, he couldn't fully shake his criminal tendencies or his loyalty to his lucrative client base.
So after all that, after the cooperation, and facing the possibility of decades in prison for running this multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise, what was Singer's ultimate fate?
The final sentence came down in January 2023. 3.5 years in federal prison.
3.5 years.
Followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to forfeit and pay over $10 million in restitution, mostly to the IRS.
3.5 years in prison for running a $25 million criminal racketeering operation. A sentence that, a lot of observers felt was pretty light.
It was. And that was perhaps a testament to the value of his cooperation to the government. You should note he was released from prison in August 2024, having served most of his time.
Did he ever show remorse?
In court, he said, and I'm quoting here, "I lost my ethical values and have so much regret. To be frank, I'm ashamed of myself." But of course, the consequences of his actions extended far beyond his own shame. They upended lives and exposed deep institutional flaws.
The fact that Singer could so confidently promise admission to Yale or Stanford or USC for a price, it requires us to look past just the money and understand the mechanics he engineered.
Right. And our sources outline 2 primary, highly sophisticated methods of fraudulent admission.
And these 2 methods targeted the 2 most, you could say, defensible pathways into an elite school.
A near-perfect academic test score or a highly coveted spot on an athletic team. Singer created this corrupt network of psychologists, test proctors, and university coaches to control both of those inputs.
Okay, let's start with Method A, cheating on the SAT and ACT. This scheme wasn't just about, slipping someone the answers. It was about exploiting systemic loopholes meant to help vulnerable students.
The key was the disability loophole. Singer leveraged the process by which students with learning disabilities are granted accommodations, like extended time on standardized tests.
So he would arrange for specific psychologists to generate detailed but falsified paperwork.
Exactly. Falsely certifying his clients' children as having a genuine learning disability.
So the parents would pay a fee just to establish this fraudulent diagnosis. Do we know the approximate cost for that initial fabrication?
The sources indicate the fee for that falsified psychological report alone was substantial. It cost clients somewhere in the range of $4,000 to $5,000.
Just for the paperwork?
Just for the paperwork.
Yeah.
And once that false disability documentation was accepted by the testing agencies, the student was granted the necessary extended time.
Okay, so now they had the accommodation. They still needed to ensure a perfect score. You can't really cheat if you're taking the test in your own high school cafeteria. How did Singer control the actual testing environment?
This involved the second layer of the scheme, bribery and travel. Clients were instructed to invent false travel plans. They'd often claim they were visiting family or attending a distant competition.
Anything to get them out of their local testing center.
Right. To move the child's test location to one of Singer's highly controlled testing centers. These were usually private schools in West Hollywood or Houston, where Singer had already paid off or compromised the test administrators.
So you have a perfect storm. A student with extended time taking a test in a compromised location. But who was the actual genius filling in the bubbles?
That was the role of Mark Riddell. Riddell was an exceptionally bright individual, a Harvard alumnus, test preparation director at IMG Academy. He was Singer's test taker ace, or proctor, and he was paid handsomely for it.
How much?
About $10,000 per test.
$10,000. That's a significant amount for just a few hours of work.
Right.
What exactly was his role during the test?
He had two main functions. In some cases, he would take the entire exam himself, sometimes even impersonating the student.
So you would fake the signature?
Yes, using handwriting samples provided by Singer to make it look legitimate. In other instances, the student would take the test, and then, under the guise of their extended time accommodation, Riddell would just go through the test booklet afterward and secretly alter the student's incorrect answers.
The outcome was the same either way. A dramatically inflated score. The prosecution commented on why Riddell was so successful, didn't they?
They did, and it's a key detail. Prosecutors noted that Riddell was so proficient because he didn't rely on getting advance copies of the test, which would have been a huge security risk.
So he was just that smart.
He was, and I quote, just a really smart guy. He was capable of scoring near perfectly, typically in the 33 to 35 range out of 36 on the ACT, without any prior knowledge. His raw intellectual ability is what made the scores look entirely legitimate and above suspicion.
The audacity of it all is clear when you look at specific client examples, like the case of Jane Buckingham.
Right. Jane Buckingham, a well-known marketing executive, allegedly paid $50,000 to the Key Worldwide Foundation for a proctor, who was likely Riddell, to take the ACT on behalf of her son.
And the result?
The son received a near-perfect score of 35, aimed squarely at securing admission to USC. She was later sentenced to 21 days in prison for that.
It just reveals the extent to which the testing system's goodwill, like extended time, can be weaponized by wealth.
It does. And Singer himself recognized how common the abuse of the extended time loophole was, even outside of his own criminal operation. He openly stated that many wealthy families had already figured out that getting their child tested for extended time would provide a competitive advantage, regardless of an actual learning issue. He said, "The playing field is not fair."
That brings us to the second core method, which required even more institutional corruption: the fabrication of elite athletic credentials.
This method was significantly more expensive. It could cost upwards of $100,000 to over $1 million, but it offered the highest guarantee of admission.
Why was it such a guarantee?
It exploited the fact that coaches and athletic staff at elite colleges are given this powerful, specialized authority. They can nominate a specific number of recruits, and those nominations trigger a much more favorable, often preemptive review by the university admissions office.
So if a coach flags a student as an elite recruit, the admissions office essentially defers to the coach's judgment on their athletic merit, and they often minimize the scrutiny of the academic record.
Precisely. So Singer's approach was simple. Bribe the coach to falsely label the client's child as an elite athlete in a specialized sport, often one where recruitment numbers are small, like water polo or sailing or soccer.
And once the coach was bribed, what steps did Singer take to create the fraudulent evidence needed to back up that claim?
This is where the fabrication became really elaborate and, truly modern. They had to create detailed athletic profiles and documentation. This included using image editing software sources, cite Adobe Photoshop specifically, to superimpose a student's face onto a photograph of another actual person participating successfully in that sport. They'd also forge letters of recommendation from high school athletic directors.
The fact that they were digitally placing faces on other athletes is just astonishing. It speaks to the desperation to maintain the facade.
It does, and it worked because the admissions officer who's relying on the coach's nomination often didn't perform the due diligence of, tracking down original photos or cross-referencing high school records. They just assumed the coach had done their job.
Let's run through some of the indicted coaches and the money they accepted. It really illustrates the scope of this corrupt network.
Okay, starting with the man who initiated the whole discovery. Rudy Meredith, the Yale women's soccer coach. He allegedly accepted $450,000.
At the University of Texas, men's tennis coach Michael Center accepted about $100,000.
Right. And USC was a central point of this. Former Senior Associate Athletic Director Donna Heinel and water polo coach Jovan Vabovich allegedly received payments totaling $1.3 million and $250,000, respectively.
$1 million.
And Stanford sailing coach John Vandemore pleaded guilty to accepting $270,000.
It really seems like USC had the largest footprint within the conspiracy.
They did, particularly due to Heinel's centralized administrative role within the athletic department. It allowed her to push multiple fraudulent recruit applications right through the system.
There was one specific anecdote mentioned earlier, related by a guidance counselor at a place called Buckley School, which I think perfectly captures the level of deceit involved in this athletic fraud.
That shocking detail absolutely warrants repeating. A guidance counselor discovered that a white student had been successfully admitted to 3 universities, including Tulane and Georgetown, after being falsely presented as an African-American tennis whiz ranked in the top 10 in California.
And the student.
The student in reality did not play tennis at all.
Wait, so an admissions officer or a committee looked at a portfolio claiming a student was a highly ranked, ethnically diverse athlete, which would grant huge preference, and they just rubber-stamped it without confirming if the student had ever even stepped on a court.
That's precisely the systemic failure this fraud exploited. The admissions office relies on good faith representations from the athletic department, and the athletic department was compromised.
And the fact that the fabrication involved not only athletic prowess, but also exploiting racial diversity quotas, it just adds another layer of complexity to the ethical fallout.
It was about weaponizing every single potential advantage, regardless of the truth.
The genius of Singer wasn't really inventing fraud. It was identifying the weakest points of this hyper-competitive elite admission system and creating a predictable, guaranteed method to breach them using targeted, high-value bribes.
When the indictments were unsealed in March 2019, the inclusion of celebrity names guaranteed this story would just dominate national headlines and public discussion.
And that public scrutiny forced this immediate, unavoidable reckoning for the parents involved. The most recognizable case, which immediately became the cultural lightning rod for the whole scandal, was that of actress Lori Loughlin and her husband, the fashion designer Massimo Giannulli.
They were accused of channeling a staggering $500,000 to Singer.
$500,000.
To get their 2 daughters, Isabella and the social media influencer Olivia Jade, into the University of Southern California.
And the method used was the athletic fraud scheme.
Yes. Falsely designating the girls as elite recruits for the USC rowing team, despite neither of them having ever participated in the sport competitively.
Their case resulted in just this intense public scrutiny, particularly regarding the social and professional consequences for their family.
The fallout was immediate, and it was devastating. Loughlin lost her contract with the Hallmark Channel, Netflix dropped her from Fuller House.
Right.
And her daughter, Olivia Jade, saw her lucrative partnerships with brands like Tresemme and Sephora instantly dissolve.
And the sources provide that really striking detail about the moment the news broke publicly.
Yes. When the indictments were announced, Olivia Jade was reportedly vacationing on a yacht in the Bahamas. That yacht was owned by Rick Caruso.
And Rick Caruso, at the time, was the chairman of the USC Board of Trustees.
Exactly. The sheer visual representation of that, a student admitted fraudulently, vacationing with the highest governance of the institution she allegedly defrauded, it was a perfect and unfortunate symbol of the insular world of wealth and privilege at the heart of the scandal.
Their legal path was pretty protracted. They fought the charges at first.
They did, but ultimately they pleaded guilty. Loughlin pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud. She was sentenced to 2 months in prison, a $150,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service.
And Giannulli.
He faced slightly more serious charges because of his more active role in the scheme. He received 5 months in prison, a $250,000 fine, and 250 hours of community service.
We saw a different path taken by the actress Felicity Huffman, whose crime involved the testing scheme.
Huffman accepted responsibility very early on. She pleaded guilty to a single count of conspiracy to commit honest services fraud.
And her crime involved hiring Mark Riddell to take the SAT for her daughter, Sophia.
Correct. Her cooperation in that early plea likely contributed to a less severe outcome. She was sentenced to 14 days in prison, though she was released after serving 11 days, along with a $30,000 fine and community service.
The scandal also exposed corruption among high-level executives outside of Hollywood. The case of Douglas Hodge really stands out.
Hodge, the former CEO of the massive investment management firm PIMCO, was one of the highest-ranking business figures implicated. He was charged with getting 3 of his children fraudulently admitted using Singer's scheme.
And his sentence.
9 months in prison and a $750,000 fine. At the time, that was one of the stiffest sentences handed down to any parent, reflecting the multifaceted nature of the charges against him.
Let's shift our focus to the institutions themselves. Which universities had personnel involved in Singer's conspiracy?
Well, personnel coaches and athletic staff from 11 universities were involved in facilitating the fraud.
But the institutions themselves were largely treated as victims by the prosecution.
They were. The schools included Georgetown, Stanford, UCLA, University of San Diego, USC, UT Austin, Wake Forest, and Yale, among others.
When the scandal broke, the universities faced enormous pressure to respond decisively, to demonstrate some integrity. What was their initial institutional reaction?
The response was swift and largely uniform. All the indicted coaches and athletic staff were immediately fired or suspended.
So people like USC's Heinel and Figovic and UT's Michael Center.
All of them. But the more difficult and publicly scrutinized decision was what to do with the students who had gained admission through these fraudulent means.
Yale was reportedly the first to act on rescinding admission.
They were. Yale was the first university to rescind the admission of a student associated with the scandal. And that student's family had allegedly paid a staggering $1.2 million to Singer.
$1.2 million.
It just illustrates the high price tag involved, even for the initial target of the investigation. Stanford also followed suit quickly, expelling a student involved in their sailing scheme.
The sheer scale of the fraud naturally triggered a response from major governing bodies, impacting recruitment all over the country.
Absolutely. The National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA, which governs college sports, announced plans to conduct a thorough review of all the alleged violations.
And that was critical, because if the schools were found to have violated NCAA rules, like using ineligible athletes or improper recruiting benefits, they could face sanctions affecting their entire athletic program.
Right, not just the individuals involved. This signal indicated that the fallout would continue to ripple through college sports for years to come.
Although the vast majority of parents, 38 in total, eventually pleaded guilty or were convicted, the legal saga continued for years. And the subsequent appeals brought against those convictions revealed some profound complexities in how federal prosecutors chose to define and charge the crime.
This is where the legal theory of the prosecution really came under fire. The first parents to go to trial were Gamal Aziz, a former casino executive, and John B. Wilson, a private equity CEO.
Their trial in September 2021 focused on their payments for phony credentials to get into USC.
And they were both initially convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy and fraud. Their appeals, however, proved to be incredibly consequential. They challenged the very legal foundation of the prosecution's case.
And they're successful.
They were. In May 2023, the First Circuit Court of Appeals delivered a shock. They vacated most of the convictions for both Aziz and Wilson. And the appellate court zeroed in on the federal law the parents were charged under: honest services fraud.
We should probably explain honest services fraud for anyone who might be encountering this legal concept for the first time.
In plain language, it's a federal crime that occurs when an individual, usually an employee or a public servant, accepts a bribe or a kickback in exchange for abusing their position and depriving their employer of their honest services.
Okay. So in the Varsity Blues context, the prosecution argued that the parents conspired to deprive the universities of the honest services of their own coaches and athletic administrators.
Exactly. Which sounds reasonable enough on the surface. The coaches took bribes and didn't do their job, honestly.
So why did the appellate court decide that the conviction based on this statute was legally flawed?
The appellate court concluded that the prosecutors had read the honest services fraud statute too broadly in this specific context. They argued that for the fraud charge to stick, the scheme needed to demonstrate that the universities had a clear property interest in what was being stolen or defrauded.
And the appellate court determined that an admission slot at a selective university is not legally considered property in the eyes of the law.
Exactly. The court stated that the universities didn't suffer a tangible financial loss related to the admission slots themselves, and prosecuting the parents under this specific definition of honest services fraud was an overreach.
That is a staggering legal nuance. It means that even though everyone agreed the parents paid illegal bribes, the specific federal crime used to convict them was, in the appellate court's view, inapplicable.
And there was a second major point in the appeal. The court found that the presentation of significant and highly emotional evidence related to the wrongdoing of other parents' conduct, in which Aziz and Wilson played no direct part, was unduly prejudicial.
So it created an unacceptable risk that the jury convicted them based on the actions of the entire Singer conspiracy, rather than on proof that they had individually agreed to join that conspiracy.
Precisely.
What was the final outcome for those two parents after this successful appeal?
Gamal Aziz was the primary beneficiary of that ruling. He was the only accused parent to avoid punishment entirely. John B. Wilson had one conviction upheld, filing a false tax return after trying to deduct his bribes.
And what was his resentencing for that?
A single year of probation with 6 months served in home detention, plus a fine and restitution.
The parents weren't the only ones successfully challenging their verdicts. The only coach to take his case to trial, Jovan Vavovich, the former USC water polo coach, also saw his initial conviction overturned.
That's right. Vazovic was initially convicted in April 2022. But just 5 months later, a district judge overturned that conviction and ordered new trial.
Citing similar complexities.
Yes. The judge ruled that the evidence did not sufficiently prove that the payments served the defendants' interests and harmed the universities. This ambiguity about the university's harm just persisted, even in the coaching trials.
It seems like the prosecution had a clear case of illegal bribery, but they struggled to fit that square peg into the round hole of complex federal fraud statutes.
That is the crucial observation. They had undeniable evidence of bribery, but the legal requirement to prove a conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud or honest services fraud against a private, non-government institution proved really difficult to sustain when it was challenged at the appellate level.
And we also have to mention the unique case of the sole defendant who achieved a full acquittal at trial.
That was Amin Khoury. Khoury was acquitted in June 2022 of bribing a Georgetown tennis coach. What distinguished his case was that his alleged scheme was independent of Singer's key worldwide foundation network.
Right, he was accused of delivering $180,000 in a paper bag to the coach through a middleman.
And the fact that the jury acquitted him suggests that proving guilt in these admissions fraud cases requires meticulous, overwhelming evidence of a conspiracy. Not all bribery is created equal under the law.
The Varsity Blues investigation also had a wider legal ripple effect, didn't it? It increased scrutiny on admissions practices far beyond Singer's operation.
Indeed. The fallout generated enough attention that we saw the prosecution of the Harvard fencing scandal, which involved a former coach, Peter Brand, and a parent, G. Jack Zhao.
Which was entirely unconnected to Rick Singer.
Completely unconnected. But its investigation and prosecution were attributed to the increased focus on admissions resulting from Varsity Blues. Despite that increased scrutiny, however, both defendants were acquitted in December 2022.
After a very short deliberation.
A remarkably short 5 hours. This result, combined with the successful appeals in the Varsity Blues cases, suggests that while the moral outrage against admissions corruption is high, the legal threshold for proving federal fraud in this arena remains extremely high and difficult to meet.
When Operation Varsity Blues broke, the conversation immediately transitioned from criminal justice to social critique. Commentators, politicians, academics, almost everyone agreed.
This wasn't just criminal behavior. It was a glaring symptom of a profoundly diseased college admissions system.
The sources are full of pointed commentary reflecting that outrage. We have Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard law professor emeritus, calling it the worst scandal involving elite universities in the history of the United States.
And the political response was equally sharp, framing the incident within a broader conversation about economic inequality. Senator Elizabeth Warren encapsulated the sentiment perfectly, characterizing the whole situation as just one more example of how the rich and powerful know how to take care of their own.
The fundamental question underlying all of this remains: why? Why would people who already possess astronomical wealth risk jail time and public humiliation just to get their child into a specific school?
It really boils down to status anxiety, driven by an intense manufactured scarcity. Singer wasn't selling an education. He was selling a guarantee of elite social placement.
We should look at the legal alternative to fraud. What is the approximate cost of trying to buy certainty through a legitimate donation?
Well, the New York Times and other sources estimated that to even prompt an admissions committee at an elite American university to give a second look, a preferential review, to an applicant with moderate grades or scores, a family would have to make a minimum donation of $10 million.
$10 million.
And crucially, even that donation offers no guarantee of acceptance.
So Singer was effectively selling a guarantee of admission for $500,000 or less, a fraction of the price of just the possibility offered by legal, massive donations.
He reduced the price of certainty by 95% or more. This is why he openly stated in court, "I created a guarantee." But there's a crucial psychological element here, too.
What's that?
A large legal donation buys admission, but it screams privilege. A fraudulent athletic scholarship buys admission, but it screams merit.
Ah. The Los Angeles Times explored this concept of social signaling. These parents weren't just buying access, they were buying the narrative that their child was gifted.
Which publicly validates both the child's talent and the parent's own success and competence. This is critical. The shame of paying $10 million is the public knowledge that your child needed a financial advantage.
Whereas the appeal of paying $500,000 for a fraudulent athletic spot is that the public believes your child is an elite athlete, a sign of discipline, talent, great parenting.
It speaks volumes about the value placed on the appearance of merit in these elite circles.
And this anxiety is continually fed by a perception of scarcity that many critics argue is entirely engineered by the institutions themselves.
That's the core argument from publications like The Atlantic. The overall number of college seats in the U.S. is not scarce. Only seats at a very narrow, select group of institutions are scarce.
And universities understand that selectivity is a self-reinforcing engine of prestige.
Of course. The higher the application numbers and the lower the acceptance rate, the more valuable the institution's name becomes.
This engineering creates such widespread status hysteria that we have that anecdotal evidence of parents specifically trying to avoid certain high-quality state schools.
Yes, court filings revealed that one of the defendant parents named Arizona State University, a very large, quality public institution, as a school they were specifically trying to avoid.
It's not about the quality of the education.
It's about social cachet. SU's president, Michael Crow, has described the scramble for these elite status-granting institutions as a full-blown hysteria.
The structural issue is clear. Elite institutions receive far too many qualified applicants.
The former president of Harvard, Drew Gilpin-Faust, once famously encapsulated this problem by stating, "We could fill our class twice over with valedictorians."
So an academic merit alone ceases to be the differentiating factor because everyone applying is qualified. Then other, often arbitrary or influence-driven, factors gain overwhelming importance.
The system is structurally overloaded. It forces parents to seek non-academic leverage.
Connecting this to the bigger picture, why does this specific school attended matter so much more in the U.S. than in other countries like, say, Canada?
HuffPost highlighted this stark international contrast. In places like Canada, while universities have reputations, they don't exhibit the same extreme disparity in selectivity and prestige, and crucially, employers do not rigidly discriminate based on where a candidate graduated.
In the U.S., however, these selective universities have effectively become mandatory gatekeepers.
Exactly. They have evolved into critical filtering mechanisms for entry into the highest echelons of socially prestigious and financially lucrative industries, particularly law, consulting, and finance.
A University of Oklahoma history professor, Wilfred McClay, noted that parents are willing to game the system, not just because the education is necessarily better, but because the legitimation of social position would be better.
And recent empirical research seems to validate this hard link between elite education and high-level success.
There was a 2024 study on this.
A very compelling one. It systematically analyzed the educational backgrounds of over 26,000 successful and influential Americans across 30 achievement groups, from senators and Fortune 500 CEOs to Supreme Court justices.
And what did they find?
A very strong, undeniable correlation. These influential groups are overwhelmingly dominated by graduates of a narrow range of just 34 elite institutions. Attending one of these schools significantly correlates with reaching the absolute highest levels of achievement and influence in the country.
So the parental anxiety, while it was expressed through criminal means, it wasn't based on a misconception. Attending one of these schools really does tangibly increase a person's chances of reaching the top.
Absolutely, the stakes are real. But the Washington Post provided a final, powerful psychological observation that brings us back to the core motivation for the fraud, rather than just the money.
But
They noted that if the SAT was just a wealth test, wealthy parents wouldn't have had to cheat. The ultimate psychological driver was that the parents had to fake intellectual ability, the one thing they could not buy.
they had wealth, power, connections.
But they couldn't purchase the appearance of innate intellectual superiority, and that desperation is what drove the entire criminal enterprise.
That deep synthesis of wealth, anxiety, and the performance of merit truly explains why this scandal captured the nation's attention so completely. We spent time exploring the intricate depths of Operation Varsity Blues, detailing William Ricksinger's multi-million-dollar racketeering operation.
From the fraudulent 501c tax dodge and Mark Riddell's test-taking scam to the extensive Photoshop work used to create phony athletes.
We've also reviewed the significant legal outcomes, including the stunning reversals on honest services fraud convictions, which revealed the difficulties prosecutors face in charging this specific type of white-collar crime.
The entire episode serves as a powerful illustration of the fundamental instability of meritocracy in the face of immense wealth, and how the purposeful engineering of scarcity by elite institutions creates this massive, pressurized vacuum that criminal organizations like Singer's are eager and able to fill.
If we look at the core societal problem that fueled this corruption, the question we must leave you with is this. Given that highly selective American universities have evolved into crucial, almost mandatory gatekeepers for the highest echelons of lucrative industries like law, finance, and government,
What structural changes beyond criminal prosecution might be needed in the educational system or the labor market to alleviate the intense, wealth-driven parental anxiety that continually fuels this kind of corruption?
that is the enduring challenge.
It is. Until the labor market and society at large reduce the rigid correlation between that narrow list of 34 schools and access to the highest rungs of professional achievement, the pressure will simply be channeled into new, perhaps legal but equally exclusionary mechanisms.
Thanks for listening.